Greetings. In this section, we are examining the multicultural and multilingual reality of what teachers face in the classroom every day in South Africa, which sounds ominous, right? Wrong. It's fantastic. It's a special privilege to stand up in front of a class with a whole range of cultures looking up at you with excited anticipation on their faces, waiting to see what new knowledge and skills in English they will be acquiring that day. And you, as the teacher, are the one who has been entrusted with these receptive young minds. So how are we supposed to teach these children correctly? Well, let's take a look. Now, the list of techniques given in the reading pieces is far too extensive for us to cover in detail in this short session, but let us summarize them according to their key elements, the first being contexts. The learners must be exposed to as many realistic situations as possible in which they can expect to find English useful. And this certainly doesn't mean oral exercises only, although obviously these oral ones are going to be the favorites in any intermediate phase classroom for obvious reasons. What about filling in a simple questionnaire or creating written directions, such as from the classroom to the principal's office, or interpreting instructions? Following a simple recipe would be a good example of this. I'm sure you can imagine how much enthusiasm will be generated when children are required to prepare some of their favorite food for English homework. Simply unleash your creativity and see the results. Of course, all of these activities must be focused, with specific aims in mind that result in logical and effectively planned lessons. But these are absolutely basic concepts and most likely some of the first things that you learnt as a student teacher. Another aspect that is prescribed but probably appears naturally in your English lessons already is the inclusion of multiple language skills. In other words, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And don't forget the language rules. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, before I had grey in my beard, I was attending a teacher training course in Bloemfontein, and one of the presenters challenged us to compile a lesson that did not contain elements of at least 3 of the language skills. None of us were able to do this, unsurprisingly. Think about that. Now remember also that all lessons should involve the process approach. In other words, pre, while, and post activities. Well, in theory anyway. My advice in this regard is that you don't take this too literally, since in my experience, this whole process approach thing can cause as many problems as it solves. Pre-listening and pre-reading tasks, for example, are logical and essential for teaching new vocabulary and concepts. I'm sure you will agree. And I have seen some very effective while listening activities. But I have never once seen a valid while reading activity. All the lessons I have seen in which while reading activities were used resulted in the learners being distracted from the text, not having their attention focused on it. And as far as I'm concerned, the only while reading activity that should be used in the classroom is reading, nothing else. And I challenge anyone to prove me wrong, so there. Anyway, let's move on. There are quite a few other principles listed, many of which are pretty obvious, but because they are in line with common sense, we're going to look briefly at a few of them. First, schemata, which is schema in its singular form. Your schema is your pre-existing knowledge and experience. In other words, what you bring with you in your head to any new learning experience. It is critical that the learner's schemata be taken into account and activated when introducing new facts or concepts. Let me illustrate this with a simple example. I grew up in the People's Socialist Democratic Republic of Cape Town, where the most common form of transport was, and probably still is, trains. I have ridden thousands of times on suburban trains and have spent many nights sleeping in second-class compartments on mainline trains. But none of my scholars has ever done that. So whenever we handle literature that mentions trains, I have to show them pictures and videos of trains for them to have some idea of what's going on in the story. But let's get back to the reading pieces, where it talks about principles such as providing opportunities for interaction and using different teaching techniques and assessment strategies. All of these are methods of keeping your classroom active and full of stimulated, occupied, and happy children. So please use them. And there we have it, a daunting sounding topic which turned out to be nothing more than the application of basic principles and good old-fashioned common sense in the classroom. And if this short time we spent together does not leave you with something useful to apply in your classroom, I'll be very surprised. See you again shortly.